First of all, I want to introduce you to Charles. Charles, raise your hand. So if you want to ask a question that will be read at the conclusion of the other questions, give that question to Charles. We're not going to have time for many of those questions. We've got a pretty tight format. And we have to be out of here by 9 o'clock. Is that right, Dennis? Dennis Minnick is president of Sharp and our sound man. If you can also help us load up all the chairs at the end of the Okay, so our sponsoring organizations today include Sharp, representing the Sunset Heights District, Sunset Heights Association of Responsible People, Golden Gate Heights Neighborhood Association, something called OSPRA, which is the Outer Sunset Parkside Residents Association. Do I have it right, Susan? Good. Okay. Speak, which is the Sunset Parkside group, West Side, Best Side, for housing group, Stop Crime, SF, the West of Twin Peaks Central Council, which, by the way, donated $500 to help make this happen, along with Sharp, and also brought our skirts and other equipment. So we greatly appreciate that. ISPN, the Inter-Sunset Parkside Association, La Playa Park, the Planning Association for the question and answers directed at these candidates. And these questions were derived from contributions from some of our sponsoring organizations, filtered by me and some others. Then we'll have opening remarks by candidates who are not here, and these 4 candidates are at a different candidate event across town, and they should be here by 7:30-ish. And that's a Sharp board member. She's a marketing professional and the mother of a preschooler. She has lived in San Francisco for almost 8 years and lived in 4 different neighborhoods, if I have that correct. 18 years and 4 different neighborhoods, right? And she's seen a lot of what goes on and differences between neighborhoods, and her family and she now live in Golden Gate Heights. Did I mention your mother a preschooler? Yes. Andrew Mihalowski, did I screw it up, Andrew? Is our timekeeper. And Andrew's going to play a key role. He will be, and this is for you, he's going to be waving a yellow card, San Francisco Examiner. Remember? He's a president of Stop Crime, vice president of Stop Crime SF, and he's on the board of directors of the Alice B. Toklas LGBT and the United Democratic Clubs. The latter is the largest in San Francisco now. So we should have an interesting time. And I'm going to now turn it over to Sophia, and you will start off with the first 2-minute speech. You have 2 minutes for your speeches, and on the questions, unless otherwise specified, you'll have 1 minute to answer. Thank you.
All right, I'd like to stand. I like standing. Does this come out? Okay, hi. Good evening. My name is RIchie Greenberg, and I am actually, I see so many familiar faces. How are you doing back there? So I'm running for mayor, and sir, you were asking about Republicans. I am the Republican candidate for mayor here in this race. I'm endorsed by the San Francisco GOP. I'm also endorsed by the Log Cabin Republicans, which are the LGBT group here in the city. So I've been living here for 17 years. I live with my wife here in the Richmond district, over on Cabrillo. I believe I'm the only candidate running that lives here on the west side. And so if that's true, which I think it is, I am with you if you are all here from the Richmond or Sunset District west of Twin Peaks. And so what I'm looking to do here is to defend from those powers that be that are trying to potentially bulldoze the city, this side here. I am for you guys. I'm against upzoning. I want to ensure that we uplift our quality of life. I'm looking to install accountability at City Hall and to restore law and order that has seemed to have been lost over the years. And so I am a startup advisor, a business consultant for 30 years. I'm originally from New York, and I moved to California back when I was 21 years old. And and I moved up here back in about 2000, 2001. And I think that I really will bond with each one of you here. I feel very comfortable. I'm happy to be in a friendly area here in the city, Golden Gate Park. And thank you very much for being here tonight. And I look forward to talking about my platform and what I plan on doing here as mayor come June 5th. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Amy Farrell Weiss, and I was born in 1977 at Alioto Hospital in Berkeley. My parents moved to San Jose, and in their late 20s, on the salary of a full-time appliance salesman and a part-time registered nurse, they were able to buy a 4-bedroom home with a huge backyard for $70,000, and that same home today is worth $1 million, and they pay a few $1,000s in property taxes. And when I was growing up, my parents had been raised poor, but they had this upward mobility opportunity in terms of that middle income through union jobs. I was able to get all my essential needs met, and I was the first generation of my family to go to college. I went to De Anza Community College first, and then UC Santa Cruz. And I just have spent the following 20 years of my life dedicated to service because I had my essential needs met, and my parents had this upward mobility in terms of income, not for me so much because I didn't feel the need for that. I felt the need to shape democracy and systems so that everybody had those essential needs met. And I've worked in a variety of different fields in mental health, transitional housing, sustainable business, worked on an organic farm. I have a breadth of experience. I went back to graduate school at SF State back in 2008 during these financial times, the economic crisis, and got a master's in organizational development. Then I started to raise an eyebrow to how the city's policies were actually displacing residents and short-sighted in terms of economic and development. And so I got involved with my neighbors back in 2011 to fight back against a Chase Bank that was displacing local businesses on Divisadero. And then I got hooked on land use policy and economic development policy. I started a nonprofit, and I've spent, since 2011, I've dedicated myself to this. I ran for mayor in 2015, got nearly 80,000 first, second, and third place votes, and then dedicated myself to dealing with the encampment crisis. So I have solutions to offer for that tonight. Thank you.
I am really thankful for tonight that I have a chance to be with my fellow mayor candidates in here. There's 3 mayor forum today, and this is the one that we were invited. Thank you. You guys have good heart and good mind. You are sound-minded people. It tells me that you really want to know who we are. Thank you. My name is Ellen Lee Zhou. I am a family social worker. I work for the government for the last 13 years. I am a public social worker for public health. I provide treatment, assessment, and intervention to crisis, people who are delinquent and people who have trouble, either behavioral health or physical health, of spiritual health. My job is to make sure that people are protected and they are back to the same stage that they can function. I am running for a better San Francisco. I was nominated by the San Francisco Coalition of Good Neighborhoods, and we were a 11th district formed in 2017, that we were the group that vocally stood up for all of you that no recreational cannabis in Sunset area. That's the group that nominated me here today. I have 2 young college kids in college. I am 49 years old. I have been in San Francisco for the last 32 years. My heart is in San Francisco, and I probably will die in here in San Francisco. That's my heart with you in here. I am running for a better San Francisco. My platform is that number 1, I want to fight off government corruption. As a government employee, I've seen enough corruption. Our boat has been cooked. I will hire a third party to do audits for our government. Number 2, I want to take care of the homeless people, that eliminate no homeless in San Francisco. Number 3, I want to create fair housing policies so all the tenants and the good landlords are protected. Those are my main platforms. Oops, thank you. Oh, thank you.
So, Thank you, Richie. Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Ellen. I wanted to take a chance to welcome all of you tonight to this mayoral debate. As Frank said, I am the mother of a preschooler, so I'm a little bit sick. I usually get a new cold every 3 weeks, so I hope that my questions get through, even though I'm a little congested here. The first question has to do with qualifications. Okay. And just as a reminder, each one of you has 1 minute to answer. So Richie, we'll start with you.
I'm assuming...
Hold on. The question is... Yeah, I haven't asked the question yet. The question is, why should we consider you for mayor when other candidates leading in the polls have previously served as school board members, supervisors, and state-level officials? Why are you starting your political service in the top job of a mayor?
Okay, as I was saying, pretty easy to answer actually. If you take a look around you and take a look at the state of what we have, the streets, homelessness, runaway costs, small businesses failing, this is because of the current city leadership actually. We have a situation now where we have politicians that have been potentially the root cause of this that are actually running for mayor right now, based on what success, what policies have they had that have helped us. I am not bringing with me any political baggage. I don't have any of these failed policies that have been implemented by City Hall that would be coming to the mayorship. So as far as me, myself, I have organizational skills in 25, almost 30 years now, private practice, startup consultant. I help build coalitions. I bring together small teams in nonprofits, and we go ahead and file and get their businesses off to launch. This is where I come from to build coalitions.
Thank you, Richie.
I'm unique with all the other candidates because I have a background working in a variety of nonprofits and public and private organizations, doing direct service work, and then also managing programs and evaluating programs, founding nonprofits to deal with the issues of our time. I believe what Grace Lee Boggs says when she says, we are the leaders that we've been waiting for. We're in a democracy, and so if we feel like our elected officials are not cutting the mustard, then it's up to us to actually come up with those actionable solutions. In 2011, to be honest, I understood the righteous no and the pushback against the profit-driven displacement, but I didn't see anyone in the city really coming up with a strategic yes in order to create the inclusive, sustainable, and culturally enriching development that I wanted to see. The last 2.5 years, I've been working on the ground with DPW workers, SFPD, encampment residents, impacted neighbors, actually doing the work to create a way to transition people out of crisis conditions and into safe, organized spaces. I've been blocked every step of the way by City Hall. No one has a plan.
Thank you, Amy.
I was nominated to run for Better San Francisco. I have already stood up for you. It is your city and my city. It is time for you to stand up for yourself. If all the politicians, I call them career politicians, they are the one has been making the problems that you and I facing today. That is why accountability for government is my #1 priority. When government accountability, when the money is transparent, the money will be at work. My qualification is because I worked for the city and county for the last 13 years. I am also a union representative. I work with 16,000 employees, and San Francisco only has 30,000 employees. I am a union representative and work with so many departments and know their root causes for you to hold them accountable. And also, I was a civic grand jury with Charles in here, thank you, that we will investigate government corruptions and government functions. We were a watchdog for you. So if you want a better San Francisco, I am for you. Ellen Lee Zhou.
Thank you, Ellen. Okay, we're gonna move on to the topic of crime. Again, you have 1 minute to answer. Property crime and car break-ins are out of control in San Francisco. What is your plan to address crime? And if you can give us some specifics about it, we'd really appreciate it too. Yeah.
So Yeah, it's an enforcement issue. In order to be able to cut back on crime, property crime, personal crime, breaking into cars and homes, home invasion, we need more police. We need more police. I am very supportive of SFPD. Right now, the estimated number of officers that are on the street right now that are working the beat is about 1,971 is what it's supposed to be. It's not even anywhere near that. That number was calculated back in 1996, and since then we have a larger population now. And because of that, they are understaffed. Not only that, but their patrol cars are in disrepair. The laptops and other communication software that's inside the patrol cars is not working either. So what I want to do as mayor is to ensure that we can have more police academy classes, to allocate more funds to be able to hire more police and take care of it that way by having more in the field. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have enough police right now. We have to work with them more strategically to do the work and target key areas. London Breed has proposed 200 additional police officers, which has a price tag of $34 million. With $34 million, we can take a new approach, where we take the 100 sites with the most crime incident rates through 311 and 911 data, and we can invest $300,000 into unarmed programming and crisis de-escalation, eyes on the street, mental health, and support in that way. We could hire 3 full-time $20 an hour positions that are unarmed, that actually network with the police. We'd still have $150,000 per site and $4 million to administer this program, working with the impacted communities. What if we really took a new approach to heal at the root? The data and the accounting is on my side. If we do this and heal at the root, we're gonna save money, and we can work with the police to deal with issues in a more strategic way.
Thank you.
I was a graduate for the Community Police Academy in 2006. For the last 13 years, I have been working with the police side by side. And I do a lot of investigation with the police. I provide interpretation, translation for them. This is what I know as I roll along with the police. The police are not allowed in many ways to do a lot of things to reinforce law because we have corrupted government department heads. They're not supporting the police. In any given shift, we had approximately 500 police, but their power is not given to them. And you also know that we have a sanctuary law in San Francisco, which means we protect criminals. We refuse the federal come and arrest them. That makes you and I in danger. So when I am a mayor, I will reinforce that law. No criminals and no FBI felon come to San Francisco. It is my city. I work hard for my city. It is your city. Your dollars should be at work. We do not welcome criminals. At the same time, whoever is arrested, they will not welcome come back by putting an ankle monitor on them. No, thank you. Stay away from San Francisco.
Thank you. The next question has to do with housing, and Ellen, I'm going to start with you this time. We're going to go this way. Do you believe San Francisco needs to build more housing, or do we need to put a no vacancy sign at the city border? If we need more housing, where should it be built on the west side? If you oppose it, how will you keep newcomers from moving here?
You're talking to the right candidate. I am a social worker besides working for the government full-time. I'm also a volunteer in many of the communities. One of the volunteer I do is I provide court report and court reading for people who have been sued. In San Francisco, we had approximately 51% attendance and 49% of small property owners. Within that, 35% of the Asian property owners being sued by the city. So now we have approximately 40 to 50 units that is empty, refuse to run. We do not need to build any more new housings. If we create fair housing policies, we immediately help the teachers and workers and families in San Francisco. At the same time, whoever comes to San Francisco to develop new houses, if they are not affordable to San Franciscans, we do not welcome them to come in here. Ed Lee failed the whole city when he was the mayor. How do I know? Because I work in the front, I work for the government, I interview people. For us to work together, we need to create new good housing policy to protect good tenants and good landlords. That's what we need. Thank you.
Thank you.
San Francisco is already doing the lion's share of development in the Bay Area. We have 40,000 approved projects that are already entitled. We have 6,000 projects under construction. We have 18,000 that are actually under review right now. We have 200% of that amount that is actually market rate. And so we fulfilled 200% of our market rate quota. We need to focus on affordable housing development. And so the work that I will be doing is, one of the things that Ellen talked about is true. We do have a lot of vacancies. I'm the only candidate that actually has a vacancy tax plan that would incentivize owners to rent out their units, but I also have experience working at the Community Land Trust as a property manager and owner, and so I understand that we need to work with the small property owners to help them activate these units. We need to expand our online system for people who are currently rent burdened, our workforce and families, to be able to have access to that. I also have an ADU, additional dwelling unit program that I developed the framework for a few years ago, and now all the candidates are excited about it. So that's wonderful.
Thank you.
Testing. Okay, so I don't agree that we need to be doing any sort of taxes on small units or small accessory dwelling or anything like that that would put additional burdens on small property owners. So pretty much the city of San Francisco is landlocked. We're busting at the seams. We can't keep building. We can't tear down any of the west side here. I'm completely against tearing down any of the housing. What we need to look at instead is, can we look at a regional effort, the cities, counties that are surrounding San Francisco, to work with them and encourage them to build more housing, because we can't build more here. There are very few areas that we can build, potentially along Geary Boulevard. You can put up a couple of units here and there, 20, 25 units. That's not going to help any crisis. But also what's important to me is whatever it is that is built needs to be built responsibly across the spectrum, from not just affordable, but 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms to keep our families here, because we cannot keep pushing our families out of San Francisco.
Thank you, Richie. This time we're gonna start with Ellen again. Okay. We're gonna shift gears and we're gonna talk about homelessness. That's a very hot topic here in San Francisco, as we all know. And as Frank said, I've been here for 18 years and I really have not seen much happening. So the question is, every mayor for the past 20 years has not been able to solve homelessness. How will you be different?
You're talking absolutely to the right person. When I became a mayor, no homeless is allowed. So far, we spent $6,000 a homeless a month in San Francisco, and they all failing. You know how they fail? We have a lot of repetitive programs that is cooking the book. I'm telling you, because I work for the government. In order to be effective, we have to create navigation and isolation centers and looking for people who have hearts and clear them out and give them dignity and train them back to the level before they become homeless. Many of the homeless I spoke to, they are good people, they are valuable people, but right now because they have difficulties, and 60% of them, they're on drugs, illegal drugs. In order for us to help them, we need to treat them with what they need and train them what they need to have independency so they can get out of the street and get our welfare, so the politician, the career politician, will not use their number to abuse your dollar, my dollar, and we all stand up for yourself. Stand up for yourself, please. Vote for Ellen Lee Zhou.
In 2015, 3 weeks after the mayor's race, I started a new nonprofit with that momentum that I had called the St. Francis Homelessness Challenge. And I've spent the last 2.5 years doing that work. The city has a $30 million move along strategy. $30 million, that should boggle your mind, is spent on DPW and SFPD to shuffle homeless people 2 blocks this way and that with getting the outcomes that we currently get. I have developed and piloted a project called Safe Organized Spaces so that over the next year we can take 3,000 people out of crisis conditions, get them into safe organized spaces, administered by a nonprofit on underutilized land and impacted neighborhoods, has a license agreement, insurance, rules and responsibilities, safety protocol, community benefits. I've been piloting this work. None of the candidates, none of the Board of Supervisors has this vision right now. Whoever becomes mayor, I'll say it, I'm willing to work with you because I actually have the plan to get 3,000 people out of crisis over the next year. No one else does.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to stand up for this. 1 minute's going to be tough, but here it goes. Okay, three-prong approach. Number one, I want to address the number of homeless here. 30%, approximately 2,000, 2,500, who are not from San Francisco, that were homeless elsewhere on the streets in a different city, a different state, that moved here specifically to take advantage of the handouts that we have here. That needs to be taken care of, number one. Number two, we need to rein in the spending and the money that we give, our taxpayer money, to the nonprofit organizations, the homeless outreach organizations, that receive what seems to be an unlimited amount of money. We have to rein them in. I want to have a summit, talk to the top, or not top, but as many as possible, all of those nonprofit agencies that are receiving our funding, and say, I want to install accountability mechanisms. I want to see where the money is, where it's going. Number three, the biggest, boldest part, is I'm going to declare a state of emergency. And I did this on TV, on KTVU 2 nights ago. Within days of me being sworn in, state of emergency, bring in FEMA, shelter, FEMA, I'm out of time, you distracted me. Okay, just let me finish real quick, please. Mobile homes, small FEMA shelters, and a couple hundred of them, 3 bedrooms each, several hundred get the ones that are the most chronically homeless off the streets immediately.
Thank you. For the last segment of the questions, I'm going to start with you, Amy, then Richie, then Ellen. Okay. We're going to shift gears and go literally to transportation now. How will you make Muni run more efficiently, and how will you improve the Judah line?
And when I first moved to the city, I actually moved to Coal Valley and tried to pack into the Judah line along the way. When it comes to Muni, you know, we have to increase the amount of the time intervals that are coming and the accessibility in that way. I want to create a task force because, let's be honest, we need to talk about this as a city. We need to talk about this with the other candidates as well, have some interest in tackling Muni. We need to get together and actually think about how is it that we get the revenue sources from corporations, from Uber and Lyft, etc., to be able to actually fund our public transportation system, and then figure out how is it that we make it more accessible to low-income residents, which I am, by the way. And sometimes, you know, it just turns out that I just got a car to do the work that I do with the St. Francis Homelessness Challenge, and sometimes it's actually cheaper for me to drive than it's more
expensive. It's a rogue agency. That's my feeling. We need to rein them in. They have a proposal now to split them into transportation and for parking and traffic enforcement. I'm not sure if that's the best thing, but I'm very open to that. As mayor, I'm going to sit down with the heads of Muni and any transportation commission, anything like that. If someone needs to be replaced, I will be happy to replace them. I think that just throwing more money at them is not going to work. We need to get the timing better. We need to upgrade the equipment. We need to get the software better. I mean, we're living here in San Francisco, the top world for technology and software and development, and they can't get the timing right. So the Judah, similar. The Judah, all of the lines all need to be reworked. The software needs to be reworked and make it more usable to all of us. Have more buses put on the roads to be able to carry. We don't need to have like Geary BRT. That's an abomination.
Thank you.
I'm a social worker. When I have a problem, I do assessment first. So the first thing I do, I spoke to a lot of Muni drivers and happen to know many of them. They look for services I provided to them. So when I interview them, this is what their complaints. Our population has been exploded, but the service stays the same. So in order for us, you to have the airline better in here or any place in San Francisco, we need to evaluate what we need from the neighbors. Not what we tell them as a government, but what you tell us. And if they don't do what you tell us, then you tell them to go home and get another job. And you have the right to do so. That is called government accountability. And we should evaluate by giving survey to you. So this way that you can have your voice to be accountable for what you pay. You pay for tax, you pay for the fees. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk to people first. And like Richard said, they have to go home if they didn't do what they're supposed to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you. I'm going to pass it over to Frank.
Joel, do you want to come on up here, please? So we have a couple more questions here.
Hi, I'm Joel Engardio. We're still waiting for the next wave of candidates to come. They finished their forum in Chinatown. They're on their way. Former Supervisor Alioto is here already, so that's a good sign. That means that they're on their way. So hopefully someone will wait. Oh, and Jane Kim is here. Oh wow, so this, who else is everyone here?
No, London Breed.
We're missing London Breed, and are we missing Mark Leno? Okay, well, okay, I'm gonna ask one more question to this group, and the question is, hold on. Okay, as mayor, how do you meet the needs of people who drive cars and people who ride bikes? Should there be protected bike lanes and bike share stations on the west side, and will you remove on-street parking to make room for them? Would you support building new parking garages in our business district so there is always ample parking for those who need it? And I guess we'll start with Richie.
Hello. So I think that a blanket approach across the city is not working. It hasn't worked and it's not going to work. We have unique needs here on the west side compared to downtown and the Mission. That here we have families with children, we've got elderly, disabled, those who need vehicles. We can't keep taking away parking spaces, and I don't want to keep we can't mess with the west side. It doesn't make sense. And so what we need is compromise, which is one of the things that I'm very good at. Bikes and bike lanes are great in certain parts of the city, but not necessarily appropriate here. In the park, yes, other areas, yes, but we need to protect the parking spaces, stop taking them away, and building parking garages, maybe. It depends where. And of course, the neighbors have to decide, the residents have to decide that. We can't force that on them. Thank you.
So I'm what you would call polymodal in that I ride a bike 50% of the time. I drive truck. I also walk. I also take Muni and BART. So I'm doing it all. I've been in all situations where my life has been endangered by another mode of transportation, whether it's a pedestrian or a cyclist or a car. And so I think it's really important for us to start focusing on truly being courteous and following the spirit of the law in this city. One of the things that I'll say is that I know that SFMTA is focused on making us a transit-first city and making it more challenging for us to drive. This is about transitioning into this new stage of people not having private car ownership as the #1 mode of transportation, and that's going to take some growing pains. I know that I'm inconvenienced by it myself as well. But this is an ongoing conversation over the next year. Remember, this term is for 1.5 years. We're going to be following these SFMTA guidelines. But let's get that discussion going about how to make those growing pains less as we transition to a transit-first city.
That's a very good question. Every neighbor, it's different. This is what I heard from people. Sometimes people put the bike lane, you know who's happy about it? The police. They're giving you tickets, $500 a pop. In order for us to be working effectively, we have to ask who needs it, how often we need it in order to be function. I am from a different country. I've seen so many busy streets, but we don't have the accidents like we face in San Francisco. You will wonder why. So this is what I know. I was appointed by Supervisor David Campos as a pedestrian safety advisor. I served 1 year. And we learned it's because there's a lot of times you got people arguing. You got people who ignore the traffic lights and people don't care about other people's life, and that's what happened. We need accountability, we need education. If they want to bike, they have to bike with their heart, not their head, and run over people. We have a lot of people elderly run over by bike or cars. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask Supervisors Kim and Alioto to come up on stage and take your seats so we have a quick and seamless transition when, oh, I see, is that Supervisor Breed? Oh, great. Any word on Senator Mark Leno? And we'll have, I'm sorry, through the door on the side there.
Hi Doug, how are you?
Okay, and is Mark Leno in the house? All right, I'm going to ask one more question of our first three candidates. And we'll start with Amy. So as the mayor of the city of St. Francis, do you believe the West Side has a role in helping low-income seniors and homeless families? A proposal to build housing for low-income and formerly homeless seniors near Forest Hill was dropped after much opposition. Would you try again to put senior housing there? Are there any other West Side locations you would consider? And since the West Side is known for its families, should the West Side host a navigation center for homeless families with children? If so, where?
Well, you might have heard about what a school in the Mission District is doing right now, where they're actually going to create this triage space for families with children in the school district to be able to stay there. And I think that's an excellent idea. You know, what St. Francis actually said was do what's necessary, do what's possible, and soon you'll be doing the impossible. And so it is important for us to all do our share in terms of creating affordable housing for seniors, making sure that people aren't being displaced in their elder years, and then having a focus on families. Could you guys keep it down back there? That's kind of rude. But, you know, having a focus on families with the Navigation Center is a really good idea. Some of the programs that I'm talking about are being able to actually develop affordable housing in new upzoning, where we put a focus on 50% by working with pension funds and having private and public partnerships. So I'm interested in distributing and focusing on affordable housing development for our elders, for our fixed income residents, for our workforce and families.
You spoke to the right person again. I was a property manager for low-income housing for many years before I worked for the public health department. I'm 49 years old, so you know that I worked so many years. In order for me to understand what you need in your district, I have to have a forum with you and let me know what you need, and when we'll calculate the total budget, and then we can give it to you and enjoy what you need to use. But in order for me to get the budget, the first thing we need to do, fire off no criminals in San Francisco, because it has spent so much money so many government waste on nonsense issues. We need the money back for the local people who obey the law, who obey law and order in San Francisco. And I understand the seniors want to be tended to stay in the local community, which I respect. I work for the government. I'm also do evaluation for families. We have a lot of family shelters given to the family. Unfortunately, they don't charge them. It's all free. Sometimes the accountability is not there. It creates more problems. Thank you.
So here on the west side, we have so few options, so little area to be building. What would work would be along Zeri Boulevard, any area like that where you have a an old building that's a single story that can be instead torn down and put 4, 5, 6 stories ground floor. The fallacy, though, is this concept of affordable, because here in San Francisco, affordable, that could be, you know, $90,000, $100,000 a year. And that's not going to help the homeless small family, for example. But I am fully willing to work with any group, any organization that is exploring ideas around where we could build. It's just we have this attitude, this pervasive attitude that I've learned here on the West Side, is that no one wants anything being built here. No one's, not in my backyard, I understand that, but no one wants to build any large low-income or homeless shelter transitional navigational centers. And so until that attitude changes, then we can't get anything done until that changes. That attitude has to change. Thank you.
So a big hand for this first round of candidates. Stick around. We'll ask you to come out of the audience. We'll ask you to come back later, and we'll have our next round of candidates take their seats.
You can sit back here. So if you could come up here, bring your watch. So each of the next 4 candidates has 2 minutes to make their introductory remarks. Then our moderator will ask questions, and each candidate will have 1 minute to answer questions, unless otherwise noted. Please don't go over your limit. Andrew Mihalowski, and I stutter at his name each time, is a Sharp board member. He's our timekeeper. Andrew, you stand up so they can see you. And Senator Leno, did you see our timekeeper too? Good. He'll wave a yellow card when you have 15 seconds left. When time is up, a bell will chime, and Andrew will wave the red folder. And then please allow the next speaker to go on. And we're going to enforce this strictly, so candidates, please, when your minute's up, finish your sentence, don't finish your thought, don't finish your paragraph, don't embarrass yourself. I apologize to you for the time limit. I realize it's tough, but we have to be out of this building by 9 o'clock. So if you have the discipline to be mayor, I'm sure you can do it. If you go over your time limit, you'll deprive someone of being able to ask a question. So, Joel, take it away. Thank you.
Great. Well, we're going to ask for the opening statements. We'll start with Supervisor Breed, 2-minute opening statement.
2 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is London Breed, and I'm excited to be here tonight with each and every one of you. You know, I grew up in some of the most challenging circumstances in the Western Addition community. My grandmother raised me. I went to public schools, graduated from Galileo High School. I was really fortunate to get my undergraduate degree from UC Davis and my graduate degree from USF here in San Francisco. And most of my life has been dedicated to changing and saving lives, specifically in the Western Addition community, because I felt so many people were left behind and we weren't making the right decisions, the right policy decisions, how we spend money in the city and county of San Francisco, and there's a need, I believe, to change those things for the better. My focus as mayor is to address issues around homelessness, housing, and public safety, and making sure that we focus as well on transportation and education. Between 2010 and 2015, for every 8 jobs we created 1 unit of housing, and we wonder why we have a housing crisis in the city and county of San Francisco. All of these issues have to be worked on simultaneously. Yes, we need to identify underutilized sites like we did in my district at the McDonald's site at Hayton Stanton, where we purchased the property for below market rate, and we're going to build 100% affordable housing for low, moderate, and middle income families. Yes, we have to make sure that we do more outreach and more opportunities to our homeless population who are suffering with mental illness and addiction, and change the laws that exist now because they clearly are not working. Bold and creative solutions to address our most pressing issues. I'm really grateful that I have had the opportunity to serve the city as a redevelopment agency commissioner, a fire commissioner, working as the executive director of the African American Art and Culture Complex for 10 years. We changed and we saved lives because we were prepared to do bold things like making sure that kids had paid opportunities to be a part of our programs. Thank you. London, please check out my website, londonformayor.com. I'd be honored to have your support.
Hi, I wasn't sure if I was up next. This is our third debate today, and I want far be it from me to defend my opponent here, but let me tell you about discipline. It's been an amazing campaign. It's so wonderful to see so many people come out and care about this election. It's been absolutely, we just left 400 people over in Chinatown, and this morning was the elderly and the disabled. This is a crucial election for San Francisco. I'm a born and raised San Franciscan. My father was born and raised here, and the greatest mayor we ever had. And my grandmother was born and raised in North Beach, and it's extremely important to me that San Francisco not have poor people on the street, not have people sleeping on the streets, not have dirty, filthy streets, not have, I saw the news last night, I could not believe it. The BART station at Civic Center had people lined up, shooting up heroin and limped over. It looked like an emergency room at a hospital in a third world. We should be ashamed of what's happening in San Francisco, and that's why I'm running for mayor of San Francisco, because I've done the homeless program. It worked. From 2004 to 2012, Mayor Gavin Newsom and I did a chronically homeless plan that housed over 4,600 chronically homeless people. We had formerly homeless. We had the property in the pipeline, we had the money. In 2012, that property, and the properties and the money was moved. It was moved because we invited such big companies into town without a plan, who came with all of these employees, and our own people can't afford to live here at this point. And because there was no plan when everybody came in, we lost any place to take people when we take them off the street. We have to redo the 10-year plan and then add to that taking people off the street within 48 hours. I have 4 children and 5 grandchildren. I want them to know the wonderful San Francisco, the iconic San Francisco that I know.
My name is Jane Kim, and I've had the honor of serving our city a little over the last decade, starting out on the San Francisco Board of Education and now on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. And I have been proud to win on many fights with our communities with you. As mayor, my #1 priority will be cleaning our streets. I want to make sure that we double the number of street cleaners we have in San Francisco. We currently have 285. The city of Hong Kong has 9,700. Now, they are a much bigger city, but even proportionally we can do more. And I want to double the number of pit stops, a program I started in the Tenderloin neighborhood, which are publicly monitored toilets with staffing to ensure that people have a place to go to the bathroom with dignity, and also no one else has to step over urine and feces on our streets. I've been proud to be an education elected during my time. I worked on leading the reauthorization of the Public Education Enrichment Fund, which is bringing $73 million into our public schools to fund art teachers, librarians, PE teachers, janitors in our schools again, funding we lost via Proposition 13. And also in my initiative to make City College free for all San Francisco residents, regardless of age, income, or any type of prerequisite. Now, a little known fact about Proposition W, which you all passed, we're also dedicating $19 million of those dollars to taking back our street trees from homeowners under city maintenance as well. So Prop W made City College free and is funding street tree maintenance in our neighborhoods as well. And finally, I'm working on an initiative today to make childcare and early childhood education affordable for every single family, because childcare in San Francisco now costs more than tuition at UC Berkeley. I've also been proud to have led and negotiated more affordable and middle-income housing for families that make up to $150,000 a year here in San Francisco. And it's just an example of how I fight hard for our city so that we can all continue to live here. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. My name is Mark Leno. I'm a 40-year small business owner in San Francisco, having served 4 years on the County Board of Supervisors before serving all of you, 6 years in the Assembly and 8 years in the State Senate. We did some great things in those 18 years in public office. On the Board of Supervisors, I created the Small Business Commission so San Francisco would finally get serious about the needs and the challenges facing our small businesses throughout our district, our merchant districts. Additionally, was able to author the Affordable Housing Ordinance, Inclusionary Zoning Ordinance, which since has created thousands and thousands of units of below market rate housing at a variety of different levels of affordability. In the State Senate, at the depths of the community college accreditation crisis, as chair of the Senate Budget Committee, I was able to bring home $120 million to literally save City College at that time. And then additionally, I authored the Homeowner Bill of Rights. Right after the crash of 2008, with all those foreclosures, we fought the banks to make sure that we would protect homeowners from unnecessary foreclosures. Now I'm running for mayor because I believe it's time for a new direction at City Hall. It is time for change, fundamental change, and on June 5th, voters will have a clear choice between fundamental change and the status quo. I'll be fighting to protect the quality and character of our neighborhoods and to make sure San Francisco stays a place where working people can afford to live. It's time for a bigger perspective, a new perspective, a mayor who's going to speak up, demand results, rejecting cynicism, and recognize that the problems facing San Francisco are regional and state in nature, and we need to partner with our regional folks. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. Thanks for all the energy you're showing since it's been a long day and you've already done a forum before this one, so we really appreciate it. You've done 2 forums today, it's number 3. All right. Well, with that said, while we still have a little bit of life left in us, I'm going to ask what I think is the tough question first, because it's the one that has all the numbers, the budget question. So, and we'll start with Supervisor Alioto, since we started with Supervisor Breed. So this is it's going to take a minute. This is a 2-part budget question, and I'm going to give a little background for the audience's sake and just to give some context. Okay. So the background is City Hall's budget is $10 billion, and we have 30,000 city employees. That's 1 for every 29 residents. Now, as a combined city and county, we require a larger budget and more employees than a regular city our size. Yet other city-county combos, like Philadelphia, they have fewer employees and a lower budget while serving a larger population. City Hall's 5-year financial plan says we're currently running a deficit that will reach $700 million, and that's while the economy is good. The report also warns that we could have up to $20 billion in unfunded pension and healthcare liabilities for retired city workers. So that's the background. So now the question, and incorporate both parts in your answer. Do we need 30,000 city employees? What cuts will you make to get us out of our deficit now before the next economic downturn makes things worse? And what's your plan for the up to $20 billion in unfunded pension and healthcare liabilities?
Is that a minute?
No, do what you can.
Is it a minute?
That's one minute.
Is that 1 minute for each question?
Well, we'll give you.
All right. I'll just answer as best as I can, and that is, when I first started this campaign, I was absolutely blown away by a $10 billion budget. Everywhere I went, when I would hear we needed to add more new employees. We do not need to add more new employees. 30,000 employees is way too many employees. We are a city and county of San Francisco, like, as you say, Philadelphia, but we are not a big city. We have always had around 777,000 people who live here. Now it's something like 825 or 830,000 people. We don't need one San Francisco employee for the number that you just mentioned, which of course I can't remember right now. Having said that, it is so important that we have an audit of every single one of our departments. There are departments that are spending so much money, like DPW, MTA, and Park and Rec. They're spending so much money with so many employees that the people at the top are running a kingdom, and they need to, actually we need new people at the top, but that's for a whole other question.
That's pretty good. Just to recap, do we need 30,000 city employees? What cuts will you make to get us out of our deficit, and the plan for our unfunded liabilities? And at least,
The unfunded, first of all, unfunded liability.
this is for Supervisor Kim.
Oh.
Recapping the question.
As was mentioned, we have a $10 billion budget, but it's a little bit deceptive because we are also a county, which means this budget includes our airport, our jails, our health and human services. In fact, the biggest growth in our budget over the last 10 years was the expansion of ACA, the Affordable Care Act, with additional federal and state dollars, which amounted to about an additional $500 million to our budget. So it's not always fair to say that our budget has grown tremendously while our population hasn't kept up in pace. Actually, some of the biggest chunks of our budget came from the ACA expansion, which we all deserve to invest in. Now, we do have an unfunded liability into the future within our pension fund. Our pension fund is important, though, because it allows our city employees, our middle-class employees, a shrinking population here in San Francisco, to retire in good health. And so we have been saving a tremendous amount of money in our positive years. We have 3 or 4 different budget reserves and stabilization funds, understanding that we're going to have to make cuts in the future as the recession comes over the next couple of years.
And Senator Leno, any cuts to get us out of our deficit and the plan for the unfunded liabilities?
Having not been in city government for the past 16 years, I'm as amazed as you all are that our budget has grown so fast and that we have as many employees as we have. One way to rehash this entire budget is to change the way we build it. George Moscone in the 70s, Art Agnos in the 80s used something called zero-based budgeting. Rather than just have the department heads take last year's budget and add something new on top for the coming year, you start from the bottom and you build from zero, line item by line item, reviewing every program. So those programs that brought us a return on investment, we will reinvest in. Those programs that do not, we do not reinvest in. It just makes sense. We want to spend our limited tax revenue as effectively and as efficiently as possible. Those in decision-making positions, policy-making positions at City Hall, owe our taxpayers minimally that.
And Supervisor Breed, anything you'll cut from the budget and dealing with our unfunded liabilities?
I would just say that it is deceptive, the number that you mentioned, mostly because about a fourth of our budget is enterprise departments like the PUC, the MTA, the airport, and how all those things fold into our larger budget. Those are enterprise departments where we don't necessarily have a direct say other than approving the budget or reorganizing for that particular purpose. But let me just say this, from my perspective, I think one of the challenges we have is we don't have strategic planning with our departments. We don't have strategic planning around the money that we spend as it relates to money that the city issues to nonprofits and organizations. And there has to be some level of strategic planning and accountability for those organizations and the money that they spend. I will say that MTA is definitely a challenge with the number of employees that it has on the top. And I think that needs to be completely restructured along with several other departments in the city and county of San Francisco that are extremely top heavy. But the one department that I definitely plan to make sure that
Tell us the department name.
I will make sure that we add more police officers, 200 new beat officers by the end of next year, so that they're out there on the streets along our commercial corridors.
Okay, thank you. The next question, we'll start with Supervisor Kim. Property crime and car break-ins remain an epidemic. How are you going to stop it? And as mayor, how are you going to hold yourself accountable for keeping us safe? You know, anyone who wins on June has to run again next year. Should the changes in crime rate determine if you get to stay in office?
So just to congratulate SFPD and the DA's office, we have seen a dramatic reduction in auto burglaries in the last quarter, and we should give credit where credit is due. But I've long said that one of the best ways to combat the low-level property crimes that we see, in particular Auditorburgs, is one, we need a dedicated district attorney's unit that just prosecutes auto burglaries and nothing else. Our DAs are overloaded with cases from homicides all the way to Auditorburgs, which means the lowest level crimes often get dropped. We need a centralized investigative unit within SFPD because the Auditorburgs that happen in one neighborhood also happen in the other neighborhoods as well. And we need to understand the larger pattern of these crimes that we're seeing here in San Francisco. So in the short term, it is the police and prosecution that helps address crimes. But in the long term, we must greatly invest in quality after-school programs, childcare, our public schools. These are the opportunities that we must invest in so that individuals don't have to choose a life of crime here in San Francisco, but can participate in our greater economy.
And Senator Leno.
Between 2011 and 2017, the rate of auto break-ins increased 300%. And somehow, in between that time, there was no crisis. I believe City Hall let us down. Was it doubled? Was that not enough? So now we are catching up and recognizing that, in fact, these are international criminals, crime rings, very sophisticated, which they have how they do it down very cleverly and very clearly. Suitcases full of laptops caught in SFO taken from our cars. So a new Park Safe campaign has been put forward by the command staff at the police department, and that's a good idea. So everyone, residents, tourists, everyone who comes to San Francisco needs to understand, leave your valuables at home, don't put them in your car, and that has been one of the driving factors. And we do need a property crime division in every police station throughout the city so we can coordinate this and bring it down even further.
Supervisor Bree.
I passed legislation that requires rental car companies to notify people who rent cars in San Francisco and at the airport to not leave valuables in their cars and to lock the doors, because we know that many of these crimes, although they occur throughout San Francisco, they actually occur in larger numbers in tourist areas. And it has made a difference with signage, with awareness, but we can do more. Again, I will add 200 new police officers on our streets by the end of 2019. I will also push for neighborhood prosecutors at every police district station to address those particular issues. And right now, I'm working on legislation to go after people in civil court, because on average, if someone is caught for one of these crimes, they spend about 18 days in jail. There has to be real consequences for someone's actions as it relates to this. I did it with graffiti legislation, and we were able to go after in civil court through the city attorney's office one of the most prolific graffiti offenders in the history of our city. We got a $218,000 settlement, which their wages are being garnished as we speak, and we have to do the same with car break-ins.
Supervisor Alioto.
So the question is, next year we're going to be judged on whether or not crime is down. Great questions. I love these questions here. First of all, I am the only candidate that has been endorsed by the San Francisco Police Department. I am a law enforcement person. I believe our San Francisco Police Department should have full staffing up to the 2,200. I put this on the ballot 20 years ago, and it's still not full staffing. Right now we have about 1,600 police officers. 300 will be leaving in June due to retirements. And we have to get up to 2,200. We need more police officers on foot, more police officers on motorcycles, more police officers in cars, and indeed bikes and horses. Believe me, when a horse is running after you, you're gonna stop. When I was a young girl here, Golden Gate Park was full of police officers on horses, and the ocean was, and that's what we need to do. We need to show that we're going to work with the communities, but we're going to have full force law enforcement in San Francisco.
Thank you. Okay, this next question, we'll start with Senator Leno. We're going to give you 2 minutes to answer this question. It's also a two-part question, and it's a tough subject. It's housing. Okay, so part one. State Senator Scott Wiener is going to try again next year to upzone housing near transit corridors statewide. Will you work with him, or will you resist his efforts? Part two, instead of just reacting to Senator Wiener, We need to know your vision for housing. What do you believe? Do we need more housing on the west side? If so, where? Or is San Francisco full? Should there be 4 stories of housing above retail on West Portal Avenue, which is served by 3 Uni lines? Senator Leno first.
San Francisco, believe it or not, produces more housing and more affordable housing than any other county in the state per capita. And we have a housing crisis. Only about 10% of San Franciscans can afford to purchase market rate housing. Only about 15% of us can afford to rent market rate housing. So when we talk about affordable housing, we're talking about housing for just about all of us. So we need to find the way to build more affordable housing. Our inclusionary zoning ordinance, which I authored in 2002, is one of the major ways that we do by mandating that a percentage of all new market rate residential developments has a percentage of below market rate. And we're seeing that developers can do a lot more than they once thought they could, as we see nearly 40% at Pier 70 and 35 to 40% at Mission Rock. So we need to make sure we're getting every little bit that we can out of inclusionary zoning rules. Yes, of course, I will work with Senator Wiener. I think we all, it's an old concept, 30 years ago, smart growth, building denser housing along transit corridors. But I would suggest that there not be an exclusion of San Francisco neighborhood voices when we have our planning decisions made. It should not be made by Sacramento. It should be made by San Francisco. And we have a history of very successful neighborhood inclusive planning, whether it's the Market Octavia Plan or the Eastern Neighborhoods Plan. We know how to do it here in San Francisco. And so, yes, we need to build more housing, but if 85, 90% of us can't afford market rate housing, just building more market rate housing is not going to solve the problem. But there are ways that we can, working regionally, because this is a regional challenge. We need to work with our regional partners so that we can identify what the need is for low, middle income, and permanent supportive housing, and how we're going to fund it.
Thank you. Just to recap, the question is, and this will be for Supervisor Breed, we're talking about Senator Wiener's upzone plans, work with him, resist it, and does the West Side need more housing, and if so, where?
I grew up in the Western Addition, and when I was in college, the 300 units of public housing that I was living with my grandmother were torn down and only 200 units were built. They knew clearly that most of us weren't going to be able to return to the places that we call home. The frustration I have with what's happened in San Francisco, as many of my friends who grew up in San Francisco can't afford to live here, is the fact that we say we want housing, but when the opportunity presents itself to build more housing, we just want to make sure that it's not necessarily in our neighborhood. And that is not what we should do here in San Francisco. I'm not suggesting that we change neighborhood character. And to be clear, I tried to work with Senator Wiener on amendments to his bill so that we would not tear down existing housing for the purposes of building more housing in those particular areas, because I don't want to see redevelopment 2.0 in the city and county of San Francisco. But I do want to see more housing so the next generation of San Franciscans who can't afford here have a real opportunity to live here. I went to the folks who own McDonald's and talked to them about the opportunity to utilize their underutilized parking lot for the purposes of building more housing. And they, surprised, not only sold us the property, sold it to us for below market rate, and we're going to build 100% affordable housing on that site. There are so many underutilized properties like that throughout San Francisco, and as mayor, I will develop a long-term plan where we get creative. We identify those sites, and we don't have to, because we can't afford to, buy every single property. What we can do is work with public-private partnerships to get more housing built and get more housing built faster. And we also need to make sure that we're doing it for various income levels. We have to create an economic equity in San Francisco for low, moderate, and middle income residents for the purpose of providing housing. A long-term plan of action, a smart plan of action that doesn't displace, that builds more and builds more faster, is what's going to get San Francisco to the finish line for this particular issue.
Thank you. I'm just going to recap the question again, just to remind the candidates who still have to answer that the central part of the question is, should there be more housing on the west side, specifically where? Should there be housing on West Portal Avenue? That's part of the question. The other part is, are you going to work with or resist Scott Wiener and his efforts next year?
Resist.
Resist.
How does this work? I could not believe Scott Wiener's legislation. I just couldn't. It would totally have changed.
Use the mic. Use the microphone.
It would totally have changed. It would totally have changed. Was it me? On a serious level, Scott Wiener's legislation would have totally changed San Francisco as we know it. And I certainly will work with him in the future. And no, I do not think we should build higher on West Portal. I think that at certain times in our history, NIMBYism is good. And certain times, for certain issues, it isn't. Because we all have to share the burden of having an iconic city. But to have built 10 stories high on what they're calling a transportation hub, when everything's a transportation hub where there's a bus, would have absolutely ruined our city. So, and I called Scott and I told him it would have been too much density. Now, on the other side of that, do we need more housing? Of course we do. As I understand it from the many developers I've spoken to in the last 2.5 months, there's over 18,000 units coming to San Francisco. I have pledged the 5,000 units that Mayor Ed Lee said that he would build. But as Supervisor Breed said, there are many things that are in the being developed now where the housing is being created without having to do something like a density on these transit hubs that would have changed the whole character of our city. It's very simple, ladies and gentlemen. We have a special city. And we need to keep it special. And the only way we're going to keep it special is by working with large companies when they come to town and have a plan so that they're helping out with the infrastructure and where all these employees are going to live. When we have a new company come to town with 8,000 employees and they all want to live here, there needs to be a plan. Infrastructure, sewers, streets, Uber, Lyft, and Chariot. They don't even pay taxes. It's ridiculous. We need to make them help us out.
I have been one of the most prolific legislators on the Board of Supervisors over the last 7 years, and I've only been able to do that by working with everybody. So I will always continue to work with all elected officials, especially on issues that are important to us. But I came out early in my opposition to SB 827 because it is a giveaway to developers. When you confer additional floors and densities to someone's land, you are giving them money. And SB 827 did not ask developers to do anything in exchange for our community, whether it's building more affordable housing, more middle-income housing, contribute to our schools, our transportation system, etc. When we grow, we must grow responsibly. But when I came out in opposition to SB 827, I also listed all the things we can do in San Francisco here to build. Number one, we need to ask Sacramento to give us more funding to build affordable and middle-income housing and housing for our seniors and our families. And then give us a goal and let us decide how to build more housing instead of telling us how to do it. I didn't always understand the local entitlement process until I got on the Board of Supervisors. But during my 8 years, I've learned this. Every single housing project in my district improved because we had a local planning process with input from the community and neighborhood. And how I have won record levels of affordable middle-income housing is because of that local planning process, and so I strongly support it. But we have over 30,000 units of housing that have already been approved but haven't filed their first construction permit. We need to create a citywide infrastructure bank so that we can build the sidewalks, the sewage, the infrastructure, so this housing can get built on Treasure Island and shipyards and Park Merced. We also need to create a streamlined process for accessory dwelling units, allowing single-family homes to double in size and provide property owners an incentive, like a rebate over the 5 years over the increased value of their properties to rent it out or to have family members move in, and streamline that process with the fire department and planning department.
Okay, thank you. Hello? Great, okay. The next question will be Supervisor Breed will start. Many of the homeless people on our streets are addicted to drugs and/or suffer from mental illness. As mayor, will you support safe injection sites so people aren't shooting up heroin on our streets? And how are you going to address the underlying mental health issue? Will you advocate for compelled treatment for people suffering on our streets?
2 minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry, 1 minute for this one.
So I led the effort to talk about safe injection sites because initially I was adamantly opposed to them, and what's happening on our streets with people who are shooting up publicly, dying on our streets, and the needles that are everywhere, including our parks, is completely unacceptable, and I want to try something different. The task force that I started last year, the data that we put together showed that we could save potentially $2.7 million by opening one of these sites in hospital visits, cleanup, social services. And so what's happening is not working, so why not give it a try? I also, since the time is so limited, I do have information about that on my website, londonformayor.com, and I strongly support the use of safe injection sites as a tool to help address this particular issue. But I also strongly support reforming our mental health system for people who are struggling with mental illness on our streets. More specifically, I do support Senator Wiener's Senate Bill 1045, which will give us an additional definition to help conserve people who have addiction, mental illness, and chronic homelessness. It's a different additional tool in the tool belt, one that we need to address what we know is happening on our streets every single day.
Thank you. Supervisor Alioto, just to recap, we're talking about safe injection sites and compelled treatment for those with mental illness.
You know, the safe injection sites is a problem to me. Shooting up is illegal. And it seems like nobody has done anything about it, such that, as I mentioned on TV last night at the Civic Center bar, people were slumped over. It looked like a third world. It's not legal. We need to give them help. I've worked with homeless people for 30 years of my life. We know how to help people like that. We need to take them off the street and help them. The idea of giving them a place to go shoot up and somebody standing by with an something that's going to stop them from dying when they can go down the block and shoot up again, I don't understand why the city would want to go into the business of centers where people can sit there and shoot up. I know one thing. I don't want anything for a citizen that I wouldn't want for my own children. Would I want my son to go to a center and shoot up so he can be watched? No. I would take him off the street and get him the help he needs. Mental illness has always been ignored in our society, and we have to stop ignoring it.
Supervisor Alioto, thank you. Supervisor Kim.
I do support a safe injection site. I think many of us are tired of seeing people inject on our streets, but we also have seen the model in Vancouver, and it works. You build a relationship of trust, you create harm reduction models to get them eventually off addiction, and actually what really moved me was learning that women often get assaulted and raped when they get high, and so bringing them into a safe space prevents those assaults from happening. Two, we need to expand medical shelters here in San Francisco. I actually spent a night in one of our homeless adult shelters, and they are far older and far sicker than we realize. I fought to get full-time nurses in all of our shelters, and in December cut the ribbon on an expanded 24-hour medical respite shelter in the south of Market, staffed by nurses, clinicians, and psychologists, so the sickest people on our streets have a place to go, because we currently kick them out because they are too sick for our shelter system. It's 75 beds, it's a beginning, and we need to greatly expand this program if you want to reduce the mental health episodes that we see on the streets today.
Thank you, Senator Leno.
Yes, I do support safe injection sites. I don't know that it's going to solve the problem entirely, though. One idea, given that so many of our folks with mental health issues and addiction issues find their way into our criminal justice system. 50% of our inmates in county jail are receiving mental health services, about 20% psychotropic drugs. No one is getting better in a jail cell, and then they're released with no case manager, with no treatment plan, and the cycle repeats itself. We waste tax dollars, they don't get any better. A new and better idea is a mental health justice center, where we can bring folks not to a jail cell, but into a center where they will be assessed, diagnosed, and treated. And once the crisis has passed and we've treated them successfully, we would move them into 400 units of permanent supportive housing, that we can build with $100 million of state money that I accessed as chair of the Senate Budget Committee in 2016, which is headed our way this year.
Thank you. The next question will start with Supervisor Alioto. As mayor, how will you meet the needs of people who drive cars and people who ride bikes? Will you remove on-street parking to make room for bike lanes? Would you support building new parking garages in our business districts so there is always ample parking for those who need it?
All three questions?
Well,
Give me the first question.
it's two questions. Are you going to remove on-street parking to make room for bike lanes? Are you going to support building new parking garages in business districts?
I would definitely move on street parking for more bike lanes. I think the situation right now is so dangerous. First of all, we've got to regulate the 60 to 70,000 Lyft, Ubers, and Chariots. We've got to regulate them. They've got to be taxed, and then when we tax them, we can use that money for the infrastructure of the city. But right now, driving down Market Street is an absolute hazard. You're really lucky that if a bike doesn't hit you, you don't hit a bike, or somebody doesn't hit a pedestrian. It's absolutely out of control. So yes, I would be for more parking spaces, but the goal, of course, is to try to get people out of their cars. And like with this scooter situation, I want to show you the arrogance where they just jump right over government to your telephone, and nobody knows where they came from, and they're all over our city, and it's inconceivable to me that attitude. I've had so many elderly people say, the scooter's coming down the block at me, I'm afraid they're going to hit me. You know, it's like the skateboard days where they were flying down the street. There are no rules and regulations. They need helmets, they need to get off the sidewalk for safety reasons.
Thank you. So just to recap, will you remove on-street parking to make room for bike lanes, and will you support new parking garages in business districts?
There's a transportation term that planners use called the Columbus Day effect, and they use this holiday because most people don't get it off, but some people do. And on that day, the bridge, the traffic on the Bay Bridge flows, and there isn't congestion throughout the region. So what that demonstrates is that we don't need everyone to get out of their cars, but we do need some people to. And even a 5 to 10% reduction of people driving will allow traffic to move again throughout the Bay Area. I strongly support a citywide protected bike lane infrastructure system because we know some people will get out of their cars and onto our bikes, and a protected bike lane is a way to do it. Second, I want to support a regional ferry system to connect San Francisco, North and East Bay, because we don't have to build an underground tunnel, which is incredibly expensive and laborious, and we can put ferries on the ground to take people out of their cars regionally. Finally, Angela talked about a tax on TNC, Uber, and Lyft. Supervisor Peskin has introduced that for the November ballot. I'm a co-sponsor. We should absolutely ask those using our roads to pay fees to pay for our infrastructure.
Thank you. Senator Leno.
Yes, I also support protected bike lanes. One of the reasons people don't get on their bikes, or their kids don't get on their bikes, is due to safety. So we've got to make it as safe as possible. And for everyone we have on a bike, that's someone who's not taking up space on Muni or taking up space in a car. So that's a good thing. With regard to garages in commercial districts, possibly with limitations, of course. If you build it, they will come. The bigger concern is all of the folks who are driving into the city from the East and South Bays. We need a new tube under the bay, and we need to start planning for it now. And that tube just doesn't get us across the bay. It could be the way to get out to the ocean under Geary Boulevard. It could be a new subway line. It could also be a new subway line to Mission Bay. We know how much congestion is going to be there. We need a regional planning process. The key here is to provide folks alternatives that are dependable and that are reliable. And then folks will get out of their automobiles. The streets aren't getting any wider. The population's growing.
Thank you. So this next question, I'm betting, is going to be the most controversial. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So the question is, will you remove on-street parking to make room for bike lanes? And do you support building new parking garages in our business districts?
I just want to say that as San Francisco grows in population, we also need to do a better job with improving our transportation system and the ability for people to get around using all modes of transportation. I ultimately care most about public safety. I want to make sure people who are walking our streets, people who are bicycling, people who are driving are all safe. And we as a city will need to make significant improvements to our infrastructure to address those issues, which will require dedicated bike lanes, but also having bike share programs have also benefited our communities as well. And that's one less person in a car. And also, that's one less armpit that you have to smell on a Muni bus when you're commuting. Ultimately, I do think also that, you know, here in San Francisco, as we make those kinds of changes, you know, we know that people still need their cars. We know they still need to get around, and we know the city is more congested than it's ever been. We have got to work with our state officials to look at a long-term plan to address issues around congestion and charge these different modes of transportation that are impacting our streets infrastructure, and that's something I'll work on as well as mayor.
Thank you. This next question is crowdsourced. 3 different longtime West Side residents, unsolicited, sent me this question, and they don't know each other. And so I thought this is interesting. Supervisor Kim will start with this. Does San Francisco need 5 golf courses? Each one is about 100 acres and serves about 200 players a day, yet the same space could serve thousands of residents as an open park or house thousands of people. As mayor, will you protect our 5 golf courses for the golfing community? Or do you have any ideas of how some of that land could be repurposed?
I won't make a commitment tonight without studying this. However, this proposal has come up before of whether we can use our golf courses for more open space or even more affordable and middle-income housing because several of these golf courses are under public land ownership. I don't think that anything is off the table. And if there's certain uses that are more narrowly confined than others, then we should absolutely re-examine the best way to use our limited land in our 7x7 city to make sure we are meeting the needs of our residents.
Thank you. Senator Leno.
You didn't know I won a county golf tournament when I was 15. It's a great game. I haven't played it since, but there's a beauty and a splendor about these golf courses. And times are changing, and fewer people are playing. But I wouldn't doubt that there are many people looking at the crowd here tonight who do play on those courses, and for those who do, they are precious. But we might need to consolidate. I also would have to look at the number of players on each of the courses and see what the rates are and what the costs are for upkeeping. But given that we have so little land and that the population is growing, we may have to repurpose for greater recreational activities or for even potential housing development. All of that should be on the mix. Everything should be on the table. But we need to do it in an inclusive fashion so that all stakeholders, including those who are using the courses now, have a say in the decision making. We have to do this respectfully.
Supervisor Breed.
I don't play golf, but I do respect and appreciate our recreational facilities throughout San Francisco and the value that they bring to our city. One of the things that we focus on doing is not identifying our park land for the purposes of doing anything other than making sure it's dedicated park space for recreational purposes. We have so many options to identify in San Francisco to build housing, underutilized properties. We have thousands of units in the pipeline. I think that we need to focus on making sure that we're exhausting every possibility for the long term around building more housing before we start venturing into making changes, significant changes to our open space, which should be dedicated for the purposes of recreational activities.
Supervisor Alioto.
Congratulate you. This is the first time we've ever had this question. I can't believe it. But I can one-up you, Senator Leno. I won the diaper flight. All 6 of my brothers, I'm the only girl, all 6 of my brothers play golf. I don't know anything about this issue, and I'm not about to say we should be getting rid of open spaces and recreational centers in the city and county of San Francisco, and the concept of building on what was formerly an open space is also not something environmentally I would think would be right. Again, as Senator Leno mentioned, I would sit down with all of the people, all the stakeholders, and see what the situation is with these 5 golf courses. You know, I always thought there were 4, so I'm kind of curious where this 5th one is. But having said that, I lived across the street from the Presidio golf course growing up, and golf courses are absolutely gorgeous. The idea of building all over them is not something I think environmentally. You know, climate change is another issue we never talk about in this mayor's race. We need to remember our climate change issue.
All right, thank you. I'd like to ask the first wave of candidates to come back up. That would be candidates Greenberg, Weiss, and Zhou. Come on back up to the stage, please. If you're still in the house, come on up. And we're gonna have to like squeeze folks in and share microphones, but I think we can do it. Okay, all right. Folks, you're going to want to stay for this. I'm telling you, don't leave. This is going to be the best part. We're going to let each candidate ask a fellow candidate a question of their own choice. So, stick around. Don't leave. All right, so each candidate can ask a question that lasts up to 30 seconds, and then each candidate will be able to respond 1 minute. So our timekeeper is here. And so we'll just start on this end, and you can ask any candidate any question of your choice.
I want to ask Supervisor Breed. We have 8 mayor candidates running for mayor. The only person that I understand who spends so much money for this race, millions. Every place I go, everywhere I go, I see billboards, I see a lot of ads, newspaper and TV. And Supervisor Breed, you get almost $700 for matching fund, and you spend a lot of money from Super PAC. I want to know, is that important for a year and a half for a mayor to spend so much money when we're in crisis with no money?
First of all, I haven't spent millions, only close to 1. And second of all, as every candidate in this race knows, super PACs, independent expenditures, whatever you want to call them, those particular committees that are set up by individuals, our campaigns cannot coordinate with those particular entities. And everybody knows that. It is illegal for us to interact with those particular super PACs. I am proud of the fact that I have raised money from my teachers from high school and elementary school, people I grew up with, a diverse coalition of San Franciscans, which is what has enabled me to get public financing like other candidates who are here tonight. I am running a quality campaign, one that involves people power from all over San Francisco. And if I'm your mayor, I will do everything that I can to continue to be inclusive, collaborative, and thank you for your questions.
And Senator Leno, you can ask any candidate your choice.
I have a question for Ellen. We have become really close friends with this gal. It's been a real pleasure to know this fiery woman. And the question to you, Ellen, is you clearly know the Chinese American community so much better than any of us. And should you not be elected to be mayor of San Francisco, what are the 1 or 2 things that you would recommend to the person who is elected mayor that we keep in mind or we do specifically for the Chinese American community?
That's a very good question. I will be elected and I'm going to appoint all 7 of them to work for me. But if I am not, I want fair housing policy to all small property owners so they can release the empty space to help the people who in need for housing. Number 2, I want a government accountability. I want an outside third accounting to study the book of government. It has been coded for so many years. That's the two things. Thank you, my brother.
Amy?
All right, I have a question for Supervisor Kim. So let's say that you are elected mayor. We have 3,000 to 3,500 people living in crisis conditions on our streets. So knowing that it takes a while to create navigation centers and housing and shelter, what will you do over the next year to show us that you're transitioning people out of crisis conditions into safe, organized spaces?
I had mentioned spending a night in one of our single adult homeless shelter system to understand what our shelters are like. And what I learned that night is that we do not treat homelessness as a public health crisis, and it is. Now, for the vast majority of homeless count, it is an economic and housing and security crisis. But again, for the 3,000 to 3,500 people living on our streets, we have a public health crisis. I'm committed to reducing that by at least 50% and making sure that we build out 1,500 medical shelter beds so that people on our streets are getting treatment with nurses, psychologists, clinicians, as we transition them into long-term housing, which, as Amy mentioned, takes much longer to build.
And Supervisor Kim, now you can ask a question of anyone.
Sure. I'll answer my question to Angela. I'll keep asking the person next to you going, and Angela never gets enough time.
This race is getting crazy.
So Angela, I want to know, in your first year and a half, what would be your #1 priority? If you could fix one thing in your first year and a half, what would that be?
That was a softball. I appreciate that, Jane, very, very much, really. I really do. You know, it's been wonderful getting to know Jane and London and everybody. I've known Mark for years, and Amy and everybody. This has been an amazing experience, but the reason I'm running for mayor, I am a civil rights trial lawyer. I have trials all over the nation, and God has been very good to me. I win amazing verdicts. I have 4 children and 5 grandchildren, but when I saw all the people living in the tents last August down on Alabama Street, after all the work we put into a plan that worked, I said, you know, I'm going to consider running for mayor in 2019. Of course, what happened with Mayor Edley, who was a very good friend, changed the whole circumstances. My plan works. Our plan works. It was a coalition of 60 groups in San Francisco. All of them hated each other when we started. And after 6 months, we put together a plan that worked for everybody, and we ended up housing over 11,000 people. And for some reason, the government stopped doing it in 2012. It would be homelessness immediately off the street.
Thank you.
That's what I would do.
And you can, you can ask a question to anyone now. Anyone.
Well, I was going to ask Jane about, you know, when I was growing up, City College was free. And buses were free for the elderly and the young. I'm going to bring all of that back. But having said that, I think Jane did an incredible job, and then I heard that the city wasn't funding it. So when I went out and spoke to the teachers. So Jane, what is the situation with the Free City College now?
Sure, thank you. So City College was free until 1983. So when I say we're the only city in the country that has made community college free for all of our residents, we're the only city to do it again. Proposition W was a modest real estate transfer increase on properties of $5 million and above, and in the first year of its passage, it generated $40 million for our city. Now, making City College free was about $5.4 million. We just paid City College for the first inaugural semester of fall of 2017. Yay. And we had a 51% increase in enrollment of San Francisco residents in the inaugural semester, and that has continued through the spring as well. We need to invest in our only lifelong learning institution, which is City College. And by the way, as I mentioned, close to $20 million is going to street tree maintenance so that we can take that responsibility back from homeowners.
Thank you. And Supervisor Bree.
Thank you. My question is for Supervisor Kim. The question is, you talked about doing a housing bond for $1 billion, and can you do so, can you promise to do so without, #1, raising property taxes, and #2, delaying a lot of the projects in the pipeline, including the water auxiliary project and some of the bonds that we are proposing through the Capital Planning Committee.
Santa Clara in 2016 passed a $1 billion affordable housing and supportive housing homeless services bond and are making incredible headway in addressing homelessness, which is actually a huge crisis in Santa Clara as well. And I have been committed to studying something similar here in San Francisco. We don't know yet if we can put one forward without raising property taxes or if we can do that without going to property taxes at all. I want to make sure that in the next election cycle that we put together a task force. And by the way, we would need at least 6 members of the board to put this on the ballot to negotiate over what would be the right size. I'd like it to be as large as possible because we know that homelessness and housing is a crisis here and it needs a big injection of dollars if we're going to truly address it. But we have to make sure that we bring all the stakeholders together, right size it, and make sure that we fit it within our capital bond programming.
Thank you. And RIchie Greenberg.
Okay, so I'm batting cleanup apparently. Okay, so my question is for London Breed. I'm trying to now bring this to the west side because we've been talking basically about Old City Ward. We're all on the west side here, and so my question is pretty much west side oriented. Let's look at Masonic, that street there that has been under reconfiguration and reconstruction and nightmare for years, more or less. My question to you is, once it's completed, because right now there's no parking, temporary no parking on both sides, and you've got people that are homeowners and you've got tenants there and they can't park and it's inconveniencing. The question is, would you support it going back to being parking for the tenants and homeowners, or would you like to see it instead become like a bike lane? Thank you.
So, just to be clear, there were a lot of people who worked on this particular project before I became a member of the Board of Supervisors. A lot of the plans were in the works, and when I was on the Board of Supervisors, when I first got there, I got so many complaints from so many people who lived there about not being aware of, this project and some challenges there. It has been a very difficult undertaking to move Masonic Boulevard forward in its current plan. And the biggest issue here for this particular location is public safety. It's to make sure that this particular area is safe because currently in its previous form before the construction, it clearly was not. And so that was the change that was made. And so no, I won't support going back to what was before, but I will continue to work with the neighbors to try and identify other locations that are for parking purposes like we've done to change the configuration of parking to perpendicular on some of our streets, to looking at John Adams campus and other locations where we can restore parking. It is an ongoing conversation and I'm looking forward to continuing that.
Thank you, thank you. We're almost done. We have 2 more questions thank you for everyone who's filled out a note card. And we're gonna do 2. Oh, okay. Well, some of the candidates say they need to leave at 8:30. So if you need to leave, you can go, but stick around if you can. And we'll ask 2 more questions from the audience. One is a rip from the headlines question. The other is a quintessential West Side question. I think they're pretty good. So it's up to you. Okay, so the first question is, at least we'll get to the first one. This is ripped from the headlines. Do you, and we'll start on this end and work our way down. Or who needs, maybe let's start with RIchie since folks need to leave. Do you agree with Mayor Farrell's tent city sweep that occurred this week? What would you do differently to address this issue?
Okay, so I did not agree with his timing. Of course, we do need to remove the tents, but not without having an adequate place for those who are being displaced to go to. Part of my plan for addressing the homelessness was to declare a state of emergency, bring in some FEMA-style trailers. That right there would have been the time to execute that plan, and that's where they would have gone. My idea with the FEMA-style mobile homes, there'll be also in the same area, storage personal lockers, so that way those tents and any of the personal effects that these people who were affected would have gone into storage. And that was not set up. He didn't have the plan to do that, so I think he just kind of did that a little bit too early.
Great. Mayor Farrell's tent city sweep.
I don't support the way that he's going about it, and I am committed as mayor to make sure that within the first year that I take office that we remove all of those 10 encampments. But what is most important is that we provide an alternative and not just move people from one location to the next location. We have to work on making sure our navigation center time is expanded, our shelter system is expanded to 24 hours, and we have to do more to address this issue. But I do think that we have to be a little bit more assertive than we have been. If we have an alternative, then we have to make sure that we don't allow people to continue to be intense on our streets, especially if we're saying we have a place for you, you take it, or we're not going to allow you to be here. We're not going to make your life comfortable being here out on tents. That is something I want to do as mayor to address that particular issue, because what's happening now, it's a public health crisis. It's not humane to continue to allow it to go on. I don't like the way that he went about it, and mine will be more of a tough love, compassionate approach.
So last night I left a message on his phone. Yeah, I did that for years with Gavin. I did it with Ed Lee, and last night I could not believe that was happening, because the way to do it is literally there are 150 tents. You do it one by one. You get them off the street within a month and a half, and you get them into the proper care. You triage them if it's mental illness, triple diagnosis, drug and alcohol. You triage them into the proper care, which is exactly what we did for 9 years. That absolutely worked. You do not go in and take everybody's property, take their animals, and sweep them off the street like they're not human beings. It's absolutely unconscionable what's going on. But I quickly want to read his quote that was on the news last night, which is why I left the message. That being said, he said, at some point here, after months and months of trying, there's a service-resistant population. Yes, that's a very sick population. That just wants to be there. Again, this is the population that contributes to the crime, the arson, and to the rapes, and to the additional public safety issues. That's a direct quote from the mayor of San Francisco.
Okay, all right, thank you. And Supervisor Kim.
Although we do agree a lot, it's actually amazing to hear 8 of us agree on something. We know that sweeps by themselves do not work. We've done it in my district. You sweep from one corner, then they just move to a different corner. I get complaints from one set of constituents one day, and then a different set of constituents on the next day. We have to have exits from street homelessness by providing shelter beds with care, and of course, in the long term, more supportive housing and affordable housing. The biggest crisis, though, that is invisible to us is that working families are the fastest growing segment of our homeless count, and they often don't get addressed because they sleep in cars, they couch surf, and we don't get to see them. We have to greatly expand our rent subsidy programs because it is often their children that end up in chronic homelessness if we don't address family homelessness today.
As I mentioned earlier, I've been dedicating the last 2.5 years of my life to this issue, and the city is currently spending $30 million a year on a move-along strategy, shuffling people block to block. I have been developing and piloting a project called Safe Organized Spaces so that we can take people out of crisis conditions and get them into a space where there's on-site support, there are reasonable rules and agreements. We're piloting this at the Impact Hub in District 9. You can check that out, stfrancischallenge.org. There's someone who got exited from the Navigation Center. A woman was exited after 30 days of being there, and then she went back to the street for a year. We were able to work with the Impact Hub to get a license agreement. We have insurance. We have a weekly meeting, a community integration team, and she's responsible for 10 hours of community support. Imagine having a program where having people coming out of crisis conditions and being in community integrated settings could benefit the neighborhood with community benefits.
Thank you.
No, I do not agree with the mayor's actions, though let me say that the crisis currently is out of control. It's not working for anyone who wants to go out with the kids or the dog for a walk. in the evening. It's not working for a small business owner who needs to move a body or human waste just to begin the business day. And it's not working for the very unfortunate 3,500 people who are living on the streets today. And that is why I introduced a plan that will end street homelessness by 2020. If you've not yet read it, you can find it online. I hope some of you received it in the mail. We have 1,500 available SROs that are vacant right now. We should contract with the owners of those buildings to make use of them. We have 1,000 people on a waiting list every night just to get into a shelter bed. We need to expand our shelter and navigation center capacity to get folks off the street. And once we do that, guess what? The mess on the streets won't be there because the people who are living on the streets will no longer be there.
Thank you. And Ellen.
You're talking to the right person. I work for public health. Our department keeping people sheltered. In the city, we have approximately 3,600 slots in any given day. Anything else, we don't have it. That's it. We have approximately 10,000 homeless, minus the 3,600. But not all people are willing to go. In here, none of us in here, I've said it over and over, nobody, not even one mayor, including myself, can solve the homeless problem unless we have new regulation and zero, no homeless allowed, by inviting the people who have hearts and quality of life of people coming. I've seen it, I grew up in church. When people want change, they need a heart, they have hope, they have love to do it. 60% people are so gravely ill and some kind of mental health issues, and 15% of the people, they are called professional homeless. Every time that the city house 500, we get 1,000 more. We get house 2,000, we get 5,000 more. That's the reason I have to hire them. I have to appoint them when I become a mayor. I'm not kidding. Anyone who become a mayor in here is unable to do the job. It's a huge job, it's a big job, it's a very messy job for a year and a half to spend so much money to be a mayor. We have to work together. Thank you.
Thank you. We have to clear the room by 9 o'clock, so unfortunately that's going to be our last question. But I want to thank everyone here for coming out and being good citizens, and please vote and learn, and thank the candidates for their first one.